Welcome to another episode of The Brand Called You, a podcast show that brings you leadership lessons, knowledge, experience, and wisdom from thousands of successful professionals from around the world. I'm your host, Ashutosh Garg, and today I'm delighted to welcome a very senior and accomplished individual with a deep understanding of AI from Arizona, USA, Mr. Mo Rousso. Mo, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Ash. I'm happy to be here.
Thank you. Mo is an author and a business executive and a coach. He's an author of a book titled How to Build an AI Powered Business Without Losing Control, Trust, or Your Mind. We'll speak about his book today, but before we come to your book, Mo, a few questions for you. You have
Yes,
founded 7 companies across different industries.
yes.
What patterns did you realize or recognize after your third or fourth venture that changed your approach to leadership?
Well, it was actually an encounter with my chief operating officer at the
Hmm.
time.
Hmm.
Um, he approached me one morning and he said, "Mo," says, "I've been looking for you. I've been looking for you. I've been looking for you."
Hmm.
He says, "We just conquered this hill,
Hmm.
and I've been putting in all the processes, the infrastructure, everything we need in order to be successful here.
Hmm.
And I came to share that with you." He
Hmm.
said, "But I couldn't find you." So I went outside and I looked on the horizon and I saw you charging over the next hill. He
Hmm.
goes, "I just can't keep up with you."
Wow.
So so we had to take a pause there, but he was right. There's that old adage that speed
Mhm.
kills.
Yeah.
And what I was sacrificing in my zealousness to charge over that next hill was the fact that we were losing clarity in the organization as to
Mhm.
what our goals were, basically the answers to the questions who, what, when, where, and how, right?
Mhm.
So we had to spend time. I had to take a deep breath, pause a little bit, which is very difficult for me.
Yeah.
And then we spent time in building the clarity around the various things that we needed in the organization, and that was the real turning point for us.
Great response. Thank you. There is, of course, another aspect of seed, which is speed, which is also speed thrills. And clearly, you were getting the thrill as well. So,
Oh, yes, I'm a risk taker, that's for sure.
absolutely. Mo, you coach CEOs and founders today. How did your own hardest failure shape the kind of coach you have eventually become?
Yeah, it always seems to come back to ensuring that clarity exists in the organization,
Hmm.
because without clarity, there is an alignment.
Hmm.
Without alignment, there's no accountability, and without accountability, there are no results.
Right.
So it's right. So it's extremely important to take that very first step, and that is ensure that there's clarity throughout the organization from
Mm.
top to bottom.
Mm.
Make sure everybody is pushing the organization in the same direction.
Mm. Well said. Your work emphasizes calm, order, and clarity. Was there a moment in your career when you realized that growth without control is not a success?
Yeah, I'll take you back to that conversation I had with TR, my
Yeah.
COO. Yeah, I mean, we were doing okay, but not doing as well as we could have, right?
Hmm.
And my mindset at the time was grab market share, grab market share, grab market share,
Mm.
which uh, which is okay if you're private equity putting an investment into something, right? They're looking for that growth curve.
Mm.
Um, but if you want to make a long-term sustainable business, it's important that again, like we talked about, drive the clarity to begin with. And then the other thing is just having, to support that clarity, is just having the right amount of communication rhythms within your organization,
Hmm.
which I've really come to appreciate through my coaching practice, is
Mm.
how important, that communication rhythm is in order to pulse the organization forward.
Mm. Let's now move to your book, Mo, which is
Sure.
titled How to Build an AI Powered Business Without Losing Control, Trust, or Your Mind. And I'm going to ask all our viewers and listeners to go and check out Mr. Mo Russo's book. I'm going to do the same. So, my first question, Mo, is your book talks about the idea that AI exposes weak leadership rather than fixing it. Why does AI act as a stress test for leadership?
Well, as we said earlier, speed kills and speed thrills. But in the case of AI, it is like the accelerator drug for an organization, right?
Hmm.
Because all of a sudden you discover this tool, and more than likely the tool was introduced into the company without any formal processes. Somebody downloaded a copy of ChatGPT onto their
Hmm.
computer, hoping to help them with their email or maybe some social media posting or whatever it is.
Hmm.
And all of a sudden, there's AI existing in your organization.
Yeah.
And then people see how easy and successful that is, and they start replicating it, start introducing it into more things. And pretty soon it grows and expands to consume many aspects of your operations.
Hmm.
Now, I was having a conversation with a business coach out of Europe,
Hmm.
and he had a client that built a whole competitive strategy around an AI um, recommendation. And it turns out that the AI was just making stuff up. You
Hmm.
know how if you have
Hallucinating. Yeah.
experience hallucinating,
Yeah.
exactly.
Hmm.
And so they built this whole strategy, invested millions of dollars in implementing it
Hmm.
based on faulty analysis and
Hmm.
recommendations from AI. And
Hmm.
that was simply because nobody bothered to stop and check
Correct.
to make sure that it was being factual and, again, not hallucinating.
Absolutely. Well said. And yet, Mo, I've spoken to many leaders who seem to be under serious pressure to do something with AI. What
Yes.
is the danger of moving too fast without clarity?
Yeah. Again, the danger is you don't have the guardrails, you don't have the exit ramps,
Hmm.
you don't have the kill switch.
Hmm.
So to recognize that when something goes wrong, you have to take it offline or you have to reevaluate the process that put you in that position.
Hmm.
But more importantly, it's you've abdicated making strategic decisions
Hmm.
to basically a toddler that doesn't really know the
Right.
context of whatever it is you're trying to accomplish.
Hmm.
And you're trusting your whole strategy, you're trusting your whole treasure chest
Hmm.
on something that is totally running on its own without any adult oversight.
Hmm. Amazing. You also argue that control comes from clarity and not
Yes.
tools. What kind of clarity are most leaders missing today? And give me an example if you can.
Oh, sure. So if you're familiar with Dan Sullivan,
Hmm.
the strategic coach,
Hmm.
he's written a number of excellent books with his writing partner,
Hmm.
Ben Hardy. And, his most famous one is 10X is easier than 2X.
Hmm.
But he wrote another book which has really struck me even deeper, and it's called Who, Not How.
Hmm.
And the whole underlying premise of Who, Not How is you basically do an assessment of yourself and you have each of your leaders do an assessment of themselves and you really start to focus on what brings you joy and energy of all the things that you need to do within the organization,
Hmm.
which things are really downers to you. You don't feel like you're providing value in that area or
Hmm.
that it's something somebody more junior can do. And then there's just like the things in the middle that are kind of like meh, right? So what Dan Sullivan argues in Who Not How is you need to focus your energies on the things that give you energy,
Right.
that give you joy, and give you passion in order to proceed through the whole process.
Hmm.
And then find a who to give the other stuff to. And
Right.
some of that stuff you may not even have to do.
Hmm.
And in some cases, that who should be AI,
Hmm.
right? So it's kind of a process you have to go through, an assessment you have to go through to determine
Hmm.
um, how AI can help you in your business and what those channels might look like. And it's usually areas where information gets passed back and forth. There's a lot of rote tasks that happen in those areas, and those make ideal scenarios in which to place AI properly. which is do not abdicate any oversight,
Mm,
right?
mm,
So just like in your organization, you want your leaders to be accountable for their organization, their results. You want to hold somebody accountable to make sure AI is doing the same thing.
mm,
Just as if you brought in a junior employee or an intern, you
mhm,
need to have somebody providing oversight and direction to
mm,
that person. And
mm.
that's how I view AI.
Yeah, yeah. You also state that, you know, leaders should not necessarily automate everything, no matter how advanced technology becomes. Help me understand this particular thought of yours.
To not automate everything.
Yeah.
Yes. Again, it boils down to what are the intended results,
Mm-hmm.
right? And in some cases, you need to have a lot of human intervention or in order to make sure that it's proceeding properly. And in those areas that require a lot of human touches, it sometimes doesn't make sense to hand that off to something else, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
Um, so that's kind of the concept. And it's pretty interesting. You picked up on one of the more subtle concepts within the
Mm-hmm.
book, but yeah, it's something that just needs to have some mindfulness around
Correct.
before you start just delegating
Yeah.
willy-nilly to AI.
Well said. And what does being accountable look like in an AI-enabled organization on a day-to-day basis?
The same as it looks like without AI.
Mm-hmm.
If you say you're going to do something, if you say you're going to achieve these results, then you
Hmm.
better damn well achieve those results
Hmm.
and stay true to your word that you're going to get something done.
Hmm.
And in that case, AI is one of the tools that you use, just like you would use a CRM, just like you would use any kind of software
Hmm.
tool to assist you with that.
Hmm. You also write that people decide whether AI works. What human reactions do leaders constantly underestimate?
Well, I think they underestimate, it can go, it's like on both ends of the spectrum. So they either underestimate how ready people are to accept AI.
Mm-hmm.
And many people are fearful that AI is going to take over their jobs and
Hmm.
things of that nature. And on the other end of the spectrum, it's are those technology zealots that
Hmm.
want to be first movers and everything within the company, right?
Yeah.
And so you got to find the balance in between those.
Hmm.
And what I like to tell people is that yeah, there are probably some types of jobs that AI may eliminate. Most of them tend to be more junior jobs. But um, AI is just not going to willy-nilly replace everyone in
Hmm.
the organization. There's that other old adage. I don't know how old it is since AI is fairly recent in the
Mm-hmm.
corporate world,
Hmm.
but is that AI is not going to replace people. AI is going to replace people who don't use AI, and that
Correct.
part is true. Yeah.
Hmm. Hmm. Tell me, how can a poorly implemented AI solution quietly erode trust inside teams?
Yeah. It boils back down to um, holding AI accountable for producing valid output,
Mm-hmm.
right? And if you don't have that going on and you start having your team question the results from whatever they're asking AI to do, then they start to feel less less confident in the output from the AI.
Hmm.
So that's basically the premise there is that
Mm-hmm.
without the right oversight, without the right guardrails, um, AI can cause damage. Just like that example I gave earlier,
Sure.
where there was millions of dollars invested
Yeah.
in a strategy that was based on a hallucination.
Mm-hmm.
And unfortunately, that's a real scenario, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
So something that big will definitely impact the level of trust within the organization. But
Mm.
even small things, right? I don't know about you, but I constantly find myself arguing with ChatGPT.
Me too.
Yeah,
Me too.
it's
I sometimes pick up the answer that ChatGPT has given, copy it and put it onto Perplexity and say, validate this. And 5 out of 10 times, it is wrong.
oh yeah, yeah. No, what I like to do with ChatGPT is I write a portion of my book, then I want to have basically a first level edit, editorial review of
Yeah.
it and give me some feedback. So I'll throw it in there. And then a lot of times, when I first started doing that, a lot of times it would come back and tell me about a wholly different book that
Yeah.
I didn't have anything to do with.
Absolutely.
So, right.
Absolutely.
So you just got
Absolutely.
to stay on top of it. And that's
Absolutely.
those arguments. And sometimes it can, without being a really good prompt engineer, it'll take you a lot of time in order to
Correct.
get it back on track.
Absolutely. Well said. Tell me, Mo, what role does emotional intelligence play in the successful adoption of AI in an organization?
Emotional intelligence is very important with respect to your human team members,
Mm,
right? You're going to be introducing them a tool that some of them are going to be fearful about.
mm,
And so you need to be emotionally sensitive to how they're going to react to that. And
mhm,
you're going to have to give them the time to onboard with the tool.
mm,
And so I mean that's the most important part is just being sensitive to your teams as they're adopting AI and learning how to use it, and more importantly, learning how to properly provide the oversight, and especially if you start holding them accountable
mm,
for the results that in some ways might be impacted by or generated by AI, then you really need to be even more sensitive to
mm,
what it is you're asking them to do and how they're
mm,
reacting to it.
mm, mm. And based on all the work that you're doing with so many businesses, what does
Yes.
success with AI actually look like for a small or a medium-sized business?
Well, again, it depends on the context, right? But to me, successful AI is that um, AI has been properly trained um, in the context of your business, what it is you create,
Hmm.
what services do you provide, right? So it needs to know that. It needs to know you. Out here in the West, we have a concept called saddle time.
Hmm.
You ride your horse and your butt becomes more comfortable on the saddle if you
Yeah.
have more saddle time.
Mm,
So it's the same thing with any new business process or tool that
mm,
you integrate into your organization. You need to give your people saddle time with it, and
mm,
you need to make sure that they're comfortable along the journey.
mm, mm. I have time for two more questions for you.
Sure.
If a business is early in its AI journey,
Yes.
what is the first disciplined step they should take?
First discipline step should be to determine a pilot project within the
Hmm.
company in which to implement AI. And this is typically something that either involves a lot of handoffs, um, but more than likely it's going to be something that is just routine. A lot of rote activities occur,
Hmm.
and AI is really good at doing those kinds of things.
Hmm.
So again, I would say a nice pilot project that's very well contained. As with all pilot projects, you define what the outcomes need to be, how you're going to measure it, what the metrics are, all
Hmm.
those types of things,
Hmm.
and then you go ahead and go through the pilot and see um, how that impacted your organization. Where are the issues? See if those can be resolved. And then once you go through that whole process, and if you deem it to be successful based on your desired outcomes, then you can move on to another project. But I
Right.
just wouldn't like drop a AI bomb in the middle of the organization and
Correct.
and and pray for the best.
Hmm. Hmm. And my last question for you, Mo, as you look ahead, what in
Yes.
your view will separate leaders who thrive with AI from those who burn out?
I think it's going to be the same thing as those who don't use AI.
Mm,
It's because you do too much.
mm,
You don't know how to properly delegate. You're very worried about maintaining control in the organization.
mm,
And so if you constantly have that tension going on back and forth, your need for control, right, versus AI, which basically has to have a certain set of freedom around it in order to perform properly, just like any valuable A player you might have
mm,
on your team.
mm,
Um, that's going to cause so much tension, you will burn out.
mm.
And most of my clients are small businesses, and the owners are used to doing everything,
Yep,
right? I remember when I started my first business, I was the one in the middle of everything,
correct.
right? Including cleaning the bathroom.
Mm,
So it's extremely time consuming. It's extremely lonely. Um, but what got me thinking correctly, I believe, is I read a book called E-Myth,
mhm,
which is all about, you know, the to delegate in order to grow.
mm.
And that's an extremely important concept. I mean,
Yeah.
Liz Wiseman with multipliers talks about that. Patrick Lencioni in The Advantage talks about that. There's
Mm.
a lot of very good business books and
Correct.
thought leaders that
Correct.
speak to that topic. And I
Absolutely.
believe that's the case whether you have AI or not.
True. Absolutely. You're absolutely right. But on that note, I just want to say, Mo, what a fascinating conversation this has been. I think we covered some very interesting ground on your experiences with AI and you've shared some very interesting thoughts with my viewers and listeners. We are very early stages of AI. People are still very, very excited about it. And yet, I do believe that the challenges have begun to emerge, starting with the hallucination that we started speaking about.
Absolutely.
Thank you for speaking to me and good luck to you.
Well, thank you very much, Ash. I enjoyed being on here.
Thank you for listening to the Brand Called You videocast and podcast, a platform that brings you knowledge, experience, and wisdom of hundreds of successful individuals from around the world. Do visit our website www.tbcy.in to watch and listen to the stories of many more individuals. You can also follow us on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Just search for the brand called You.